My hand was shaking around the remote. Not from cold. The living room was warm, too warm, the kind of warm that comes from a fireplace nobody needed in October because somebody wanted the room to look a certain way on camera. My thumb hovered over the power button. On the screen, frozen on pause, was a face I had spent 11 months being told did not exist. Behind me, my mother's voice dropped to a whisper, the kind she used when she didn't want the neighbors to hear us fighting when I was a kid. Turn it off. Turn it off right now before he sees it. I didn't turn it off. I pressed play. My name is Melissa and Carver. I'm 34 years old, and by the time any of this happened, I had already built something most people spend their whole lives chasing and never catch. I own a mid-sized logistics consulting firm, Carver Freight Solutions, that I started in a spare bedroom 9 years ago with a laptop, a used Honda Civic, and $4,200 of my own savings. By last year, the company was doing $6.8 million in annual revenue, with 11 employees on payroll and a warehouse contract with 3 regional grocery chains. I tell you this not to brag. I tell you this because it matters later. I was engaged to a man named Daniel Reyes, 36, an orthopedic surgeon, gentle in a way that made my chest hurt sometimes, the good kind of hurt. Daniel's family had money. Old money, the kind that doesn't advertise itself, the kind that owns a beach property in Carmel and never mentions it. His mother, Vivian Reyes, ran a family foundation with $40 million in assets. His father, Charles Reyes, had retired from orthopedic practice himself, having built the very hospital wing his son now worked in. And my parents, Gregory and Donna Carver, had been formally, explicitly, permanently banned from ever meeting them. Not by Daniel's family, by mine. It started on a Tuesday in February, 7 months before the wedding, at a dinner my father insisted on hosting, just for the two of us, sweetheart, before things get official. I remember the tablecloth. White linen, ironed so hard it had a shine to it, the kind my mother only used for church functions and funerals. I remember my father's whiskey glass, refilled twice before the appetizers even came, and the way he loosened his tie like a man settling in for a performance. So, he said, cutting into his steak without looking at me, have you told the Reyeses about the business yet? The real numbers. They know I own a company, Dad. That's not what I asked. My mother reached over and put her hand on mine, and for 1 second I thought it was tenderness. It wasn't. Honey, she said, in the voice she used when she was about to ask me for money. Your father and I have been talking. We think, for the sake of the family, for how this looks, it might be smart if we handled the introductions ourselves. Managed the narrative a little. Managed the narrative. You don't want them thinking we're beneath them, my father said, and he smiled when he said it like it was a joke, except his eyes weren't smiling at all. I didn't understand yet what managing the narrative meant. I would understand in 11 days. 11 days later, I was CC'd by accident on an email chain that was never meant to include me. The subject line read, Rear Carver Family Intro Talking Points. My father had written to my mother, and somehow, in a slip that would unravel everything, hit reply all on a thread that included me from a group calendar invite weeks earlier. Don't mention the second mortgage, he'd written. Don't mention Melissa paid off our card debt last year. That makes us look like we're leeching. Say I'm between consulting contracts. Say your sister's condo is actually ours, we're just renting it out temporarily. We need to look solid before we ever get in a room with these people. One shot at this. I sat in my car in the parking garage of my own office building and read it 4 times. I called my father that night. I kept my voice level. I always kept my voice level with him. I'd learned a long time ago that volume was a currency he could outspend me on every single time. You're lying to the Reyeses. About money. About the house. There was a pause, then the practiced silky tone he used on car salesmen and IRS auditors. Melissa, honey, it's called optics management. Every family does it. You don't walk into a negotiation showing your whole hand. Charles Reyes is a businessman. He'll respect the strategy once he sees the results. It's not a negotiation, Dad. It's my wedding. Everything's a negotiation, he said, and I heard ice hit glass on his end. Another drink. You'll understand that when you're older. I pretended to believe him. I told him fine, whatever, just don't embarrass me. And I hung up and I sat very still in my kitchen because pretending was the first tool I picked up that night, and I would need it for the next 4 months. 3 weeks later I came to my parents' house to drop off wedding invitation proofs. The front door was unlocked. I let myself in and I heard my mother on the phone in the kitchen, laughing the specific laugh she used when she thought she was being clever with someone. No, we're not broke, we're just liquid poor right now, that's all. Greg's got some deals in the pipeline. Once Melissa's married in, we'll have access to a whole different tier of, connections. Vivian Reyes sits on 3 hospital boards. That's not nothing. I stood in the hallway, invitation proofs pressed to my chest like a shield, and listened to my mother describe my marriage as a tier upgrade. I hired a forensic accountant. Not because I wanted to, because something in my gut, the same gut that had built a 7-figure company from a spare bedroom, told me the email and the phone call were not the whole story. They were the version of the truth my parents were comfortable with me finding. The real story took 6 weeks to surface. My father hadn't just exaggerated his finances. He'd taken out a $180,000 home equity line of credit against my grandmother's paid-off house. The house he'd inherited, the house he'd promised my mother he would never touch. Using forged authorization on a power of attorney document he was never actually granted. My grandmother, 81 years old, living in an assisted facility with early-stage dementia, had no idea her home had been leveraged to fund what I eventually pieced together was a plan. Get close to the Reyes family, get invited into one of Charles Reyes's private investment funds, and quietly pay off the debt with returns before anyone noticed the whole. It was fraud. Elder financial abuse specifically, under my state statutes. And my father was planning to walk my grandmother's stolen equity straight into a room with the family of the man I loved, smiling the whole time. The final beat came by accident, the way the worst ones always do. I'd left my phone recording in my bag after a dress fitting at my mother's house. Habit from client calls, nothing intentional, and forgot it on the counter while I stepped out to take Daniel's call in the yard. When I came back in, my parents were mid-conversation, and neither of them knew the phone had kept running. She's so easy, my mother was saying, laughing. Give her a hug, tell her we're proud of her and she'll believe anything. Always has. That's the thing about Melissa, my father said. She built her whole company on trusting numbers on a page. Real people. She's an open book. We just have to keep her calm until the wedding's done and the money's moved. I stood in my own mother's hallway and listened to my parents call me easy to fool. In the same breath they used to plan how to keep fooling me. I did not slam the door. I did not confront them that day. I smiled, walked back in, and asked my mother if the seamstress could take the waist in another ½ inch. Here is what 9 years of running a company teaches you that nothing else does. The person who reacts first loses first. So I made a decision, standing in that hallway with my phone still warm in my bag from recording the truth. I would become soft, foggy, a little overwhelmed the way brides are supposed to be. I would let them believe the wedding stress had shrunk me down to something manageable. I started slouching a little at family dinners. I let my voice go higher, thinner, apologetic. I don't really understand the finance stuff, Dad. You always explained it better than me. Even though I built and ran an 11-person company that outperformed businesses twice its size, I carried a physical prop everywhere. A fat 3-ring wedding binder, color-tabbed, that I fumbled with on purpose, dropping papers, sighing, letting my mother sigh back at me like I was a burden she was patiently carrying. Internally, I was doing something very different. That binder had a false back pocket. Every conversation I accidentally walked into, every document I accidentally left photocopies of on the kitchen table where my father liked to sit, was placed there with the precision of a woman who reconciled freight manifests for a living. I let my father believe he'd successfully coached me into ignorance. I let my mother believe her daughter really was, after all these years, still easy. That was the whole point. Confident people get caught planning. Careless people get caught doing. The bait was simple and it was the binder. I accidentally left a printed draft of my will and trust update inside the wedding binder's front pocket at a family dinner 3 weeks before the wedding. A real draft from my real attorney, showing that upon marriage, per my instruction, I was restructuring my company's ownership shares into a trust that explicitly protected them from my parents' access, citing documented financial risk within immediate family. I wanted my father to find it. I wanted him to panic. I also left, taped inside the binder's spiral spine where a careless hand flipping through wedding vendor contracts would never notice but a deliberate search would, a small voice recorder, the kind Daniel used to dictate surgical notes, borrowed for the occasion. Battery good for 11 hours. And on my phone, a shared location and a text thread with Daniel that simply read, "Watching. Don't react to anything tonight, just let it happen." I gave the binder to my mother to hold on to for 2 days while I dealt with vendor calls, knowing my father went through her things when he thought no one was paying attention, a habit I'd caught him in twice growing up. Then I waited. 2 nights later, at 11:40 p.m., my phone buzzed once under my leg while Daniel and I sat on his parents' porch, and I felt it against my thigh like a held breath finally released. The recorder had picked up motion. My father had found the binder. The rehearsal dinner was held at the Reyes family's home, in a dining room with a chandelier that probably cost more than my first car. 40 guests. White orchids down the center of the table. My mother wore a blush pink dress she'd bought specifically, she told the tailor, to look soft, approachable, not intimidating. My father had 2 drinks before the appetizers arrived. Then a third. Charles Reyes stood to give a toast, warm, gracious, the kind of toast that made my chest ache the good way again. And that was when my father decided the room was his. "Speaking of family," my father said loudly, standing, swaying slightly, glass raised, "I just want to say, Charles, Vivian, we are thrilled to be joining a family of your caliber. Really. Melissa's done well for herself, but between us, she gets her head for business from me. I practically ran the numbers on that company of hers for years." My mother laughed her clever laugh. "Greg's being modest. We basically financed her early on." I felt Daniel's hand find mine under the table. My father wasn't finished. He turned toward Charles and something ugly and loose slid into his voice. The whiskey voice. The voice I'd heard through 100 slammed doors as a kid. "And listen, since we're all family now, Charles, I've got some real opportunity on the table. That investment fund of yours. I think it's time we talked about getting me a seat at that table too. Family helps family, right?" The room had gone quiet in that specific way rooms go quiet when everyone senses a wrong note but no one wants to be the one who says so. I stood up. I did not raise my voice. "Dad," I said, "before you talk about getting a seat at Charles's table, maybe you should explain why Grandma Ruth's house has an $180,000 lien on it that she never signed for." The silence changed shape. "I have the forged power of attorney," I continued, calm, flat, the same voice I use closing 7-figure freight contracts. "I have the loan documents. I have the recording from Tuesday in my binder, where you told Mom you'd keep me calm until the wedding's done and the money's moved. I have 6 weeks of forensic accounting showing exactly where Grandma's equity went. And Charles." I turned to him, and I watched something settle hard and quiet in his face. "I have the email where my parents planned to lie to you and Vivian about their finances specifically so they could get access to your investment fund." My father's face had gone the color of the tablecloth linen at that first dinner in February. "Melissa, sweetheart, this is a misunderstanding. The money was always going to be paid back. It's a loan. That's how family equity works." "It's not a loan, Dad. It's a felony. I already called Adult Protective Services this morning, and a detective from the Financial Crimes Unit is expecting my call tonight to confirm you were here." I reached into my clutch and took out the printed forged power of attorney document. The one my attorney had confirmed in writing was not authentic. And I set it in the center of the table beside the orchids and I tore it once cleanly down the middle. 2 officers, arranged in advance through my attorney's contact at the Financial Crimes Unit, were waiting by the front gate when my father stumbled out 40 minutes later, still protesting that it was a family matter. It was not a family matter anymore. It was evidence. In the 6 weeks that followed, the consequences arrived the way consequences arrive when you've already done the paperwork. My father, Gregory Carver, was charged with financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult and forgery in the 2nd degree. He accepted a plea deal requiring full restitution of the $180,000 to my grandmother's estate, 5 years of probation, and a permanent bar from serving as power of attorney or fiduciary for any family member again. My mother, Donna Carver, was not criminally charged. She hadn't signed anything, but the Financial Crimes Detective's report, combined with the recording, ended any chance of her maintaining plausible deniability with the rest of our extended family. My aunt, her own sister, stopped speaking to her within the month. The image she had spent 30 years curating, devoted wife, proud mother, woman of quiet dignity, did not survive one torn piece of paper on a dinner table. The wedding remarkably still happened 5 weeks later than planned, smaller than intended, and better than I could have imagined. And here is the part one wants you to hear clearly, because it's the part that matters. My grandmother, Ruth, knew none of this was her fault. She hadn't signed anything. She hadn't asked for any of it. I paid off the remaining gap in restitution myself before her insurance settlement came through, so she never had to feel the fear of almost losing her home, not even for a single night. I moved her into a private room at her facility, the good one with the garden view she'd always wanted, and told her it was a loyalty discount. She never needed to know the truth of where the money almost went. Some kindnesses don't need an audience. It was raining the night my father showed up at our new front door, 11 weeks after the wedding. He looked smaller than I remembered. His coat was the wrong size, borrowed or bought secondhand, and his shoes were soaked through. He'd lost the consulting contract he'd been coasting on for years. Turned out between contracts hadn't been a lie after all, just an early one, and probation restrictions had made most employers nervous to touch him. "Melissa," he said, and his voice had none of the whiskey-warm confidence left in it. "I've got nowhere else. Your mother and we're not really speaking right now. I just need somewhere to stay. Few nights. Please." I stood in the doorway with the porch light throwing rain shadows across his face, and I felt Daniel's hand come to rest, warm and steady, on the small of my back. I did not raise my voice. I never had needed to. "You forged a document to steal from a woman who used to sing to me when I had nightmares," I said. "You called me easy to fool in my own mother's kitchen. I gave you every chance to tell me the truth yourself, and you chose the lie every single time, right up until the lie ran out of road. I'm not your safety net anymore, Dad. I'm done being managed." I closed the door. I heard his footsteps retreat down the wet walkway, slower than I expected, and then nothing. Daniel wrapped both arms around me from behind, chin resting on top of my head, and said quiet into my hair, "You okay?" "I will be," I said. And for the first time in almost a year, I actually believed it. "Here's what I learned and what I want you to take with you. Real love doesn't need a performance, and real family doesn't need a strategy. If the people who raised you are managing you instead of trusting you, that's not protection, that's control wearing a nicer coat. Trust your gut when something feels rehearsed, even from the people who taught you how to talk." Have you ever had to protect yourself from someone who was supposed to protect you? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. If this story hit home, hit like, subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next one.